Let's start with a difficult question. What if marriage is no longer serving men the way it used to? What if the very institution that once meant partnership, stability, and respect now comes with emotional risks, legal disadvantages, and psychological tolls for men? This isn't about hating marriage. It's about understanding why so many men today are walking away from it and what psychology says about that choice. Because once you take a clear look at modern human behavior, relationships, and the shifting gender dynamics, you start to realize something uncomfortable. There are deep, often unspoken reasons why men should think twice about getting married. Let's dive into them. 1. The emotional equation is no longer balanced. In traditional relationships, men were providers. Women were caregivers. There was a mutual dependency. You gave something and got something in return. But in today's world, the roles have shifted. Now, men are often expected to provide just as much, financially, emotionally, socially, but they don't always receive the same depth of support in return. Psychology shows that men, in many modern relationships, are more likely to suppress their emotions to avoid being judged, be held to unrealistic expectations of stoicism and provision, struggle to find emotional intimacy or validation. One study published in the Journal of Marriage and Family found that married men report lower emotional satisfaction than women in the same marriage. In fact, men in marriages often carry silent emotional burdens. They're expected to be strong, supportive, dependable, while rarely being asked, "How are you really doing?" And here's the issue. Men are not emotionally invincible. But the traditional model of marriage often leaves little room for male vulnerability without it being perceived as weakness. Over time, that leads to isolation, emotional numbness, and even depression. So ask yourself, is a system that stifles your emotional truth worth entering? 2. Divorce isn't just painful, it's devastating for men. Let's be blunt. The legal system is not designed to protect men in divorce. Psychology can tell you how men cope, but the data, that tells a darker story. Statistically, 70% of divorces are initiated by women. In custody battles, men are awarded primary custody only 10% of the time. Men are more likely to be hit with alimony and child support, even if both partners worked. Many men face legal battles just to see their own children. And the psychological impact? Devastating. Divorced men are more likely to suffer from depression and anxiety, at a higher risk of suicide, especially after losing access to their children, less likely to have strong social support post-divorce. Marriage, in its modern legal form, is not a 50-50 agreement. It's often a one-sided contract where the risk is heavier on the man's side and the emotional aftermath is brutal. Marriage doesn't just give love, it gives leverage. And when things fall apart, men often pay the higher price. 3. The decline of intimacy, the roommate phase. Marriage is supposed to bring closeness, but for many men, it leads to the opposite. Psychologists talk about the roommate phase in long-term relationships. That's when intimacy fades, passion turns into routine. Physical connection becomes obligation or disappears entirely, and research shows it's men who often suffer in silence. According to a study in the Archives of Sexual Behavior, married men report significantly lower levels of sexual satisfaction compared to their unmarried or cohabitating peers. Why? Because marriage often brings emotional complacency. People stop trying. They take each other for granted. Affection becomes scheduled or weaponized. And in many relationships, men feel they're no longer desired, just expected. They become providers, protectors, fathers, but not lovers. And the psychological cost of feeling unwanted by your own partner, it chips away at your confidence, your masculinity, your sense of worth. Many men stay married out of obligation, but inside, they're emotionally starving. That's not connection. That's slow erosion. 4. Marriage is not the same for men and women. Let's look at what the data actually says. Studies consistently show married women live longer and report higher happiness than unmarried women. Married men, on the other hand, are more likely to die younger than single men if the marriage is unhappy. Why? Because marriage is often emotionally unequal. Women are more likely to talk about their feelings, seek support, and express dissatisfaction. Men, they stay silent. They bottle things up. They tough it out until the stress explodes into health issues or breakdown. Even in happy marriages, men are less likely to ask for help, less likely to get therapy, and less likely to have social outlets outside of their partner. Which means when marriage breaks down or gets emotionally cold, men have nowhere to go. And that's dangerous because isolation is one of the biggest predictors of male mental health decline. The loss of freedom and the rise of resentment. One of the most overlooked psychological impacts of marriage on men is freedom loss. Now, commitment isn't the issue. But when marriage becomes a series of expectations, limitations, and guilt trips, freedom slowly dies. Many married men report less time for hobbies, friends, or solitude, constant need for approval on basic decisions, emotional, consequences for not checking in or being present at all times, and over time, that builds resentment. You're no longer living as an individual. You become a role, a husband, a father, a provider, and slowly, your identity shrinks. You give up who you were to become what's expected of you. That's not love. That's a slow psychological erasure. And it's why so many men feel trapped, not in the relationship itself, but in the version of themselves they were forced to become. 6. The myth of security and the reality of change. People say marriage brings stability, but in truth, marriage doesn't protect you from falling out of love, or from betrayal, or from drifting apart. In fact, psychology shows that long-term emotional compatibility is rare. People change, values shift, desires evolve. What felt like a perfect match at 30 might feel like a trap by 40. But with marriage, you're legally and socially locked in, and in many cases, men feel they can't leave because they'll lose access to their kids. They'll lose their home. They'll be financially drained. They'll be shamed by family or society, so they stay, miserable, stuck, silently dying inside. Marriage gives the illusion of security, but in reality, it can become a psychological prison. And for men, that prison often has no door out, just guilt, loss, and silence. So, should men never get married? Let's be clear. This isn't about promoting bitterness. It's about awareness. Because the truth is, not all marriages are toxic. Not all women are manipulative, and not all men are victims. But if you're a man thinking about marriage, you need to know what you're really signing up for. You need to know what the legal risks are, what the psychological patterns look like, what losing your identity feels like. What happens when you give everything and get crumbs in return? And most importantly, you need to stop believing that marriage will fix your loneliness, your insecurities, or your need for connection. It won't. You. Fix that first within yourself. And then, if you choose to love someone, do it from strength, not desperation. Because men who understand themselves, protect their energy, and stay aware of psychological dynamics, those men don't get trapped. They love when it's real, and walk away when it's not. That's not weakness. That's wisdom.